if we look at your endocrine system associated with your brain, the hypothalamus really is the boss for most of what is going on with hormones in your system. It is going to control all of the secretions of your pituitary gland. And we see here the hypothalamus sort of hangs off of your brain, but then the anterior and posterior pituitary glands literally hang off of the hypothalamus. So there are direct connections, and they're going to work together through your autonomic nervous system to regulate pretty much everything that goes on in your body. The posterior pituitary is only responsible for 2 hormones. Posterior, of course, meaning back or rear. So the one behind. And in this case, these hormones are actually produced in the hypothalamus and stored in the posterior pituitary. So it really is just a housing point until the hormones get released. And the 2 hormones it controls are oxytocin that we just talked about, associated with uterine contractions and childbirth. Guys, don't feel left out here. You produce oxytocin as well. They've actually now linked it to a lot of the sexual function in men. Antidiuretic hormone, so diuretic is associated with your kidneys. So antidiuretic hormone decreases urine release. So these would be associated with a number of different functions in the body, but they will not be released from the posterior pituitary until the hypothalamus says so. So the hypothalamus makes these, stores them in the posterior pituitary, but the posterior pituitary will not release them until the hypothalamus says so. So this is a very strong role connection for these 2 particular hormones. The anterior pituitary is actually responsible for 6 different hormones, and again, their secretions are completely regulated by the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus says release or inhibit what is going on in the anterior pituitary. In this case, TRH is thyroid releasing hormone. TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. And thyroxine is actually involved in your metabolism. So this negative feedback system looks at the hypothalamus regulating the release of thyroid stimulating hormone that regulates the release of the thyroxine by the thyroid that stimulates metabolism. Well, if thyroxine is produced in high levels, we can actually go back and slow down this process. But we also look at points when the thyroxine levels get very, very high and we don't turn it off, and we end up in what we call a hyperthyroid state. Hyperthyroidism is associated with increased metabolism, which sounds good to a point. We end up with severe conditions associated with this in some individuals. Your thyroid is actually going to be targeted a lot by your anterior pituitary and your hypothalamus indirectly. And we look at the anterior pituitary actually producing 6 major hormone groups, as we said: the thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenal hormone. We look at follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, prolactin associated with the mammary glands, growth hormone that's actually going to target your entire body, and we'll look at that one, and endorphins. These are what tell you whether or not something hurts. So when we say someone has a high tolerance for pain, we look at the amount of endorphins that they're producing. Growth hormone, one of the ones that is going to target your entire body, increases cell size, rate of cell division in primarily bone and muscle and cartilage, but we also look at the idea that we can use growth hormone to increase glucose conversion, and by and to increase the rate at which fats are converted into energy. So throughout your adolescence and your growth spurts, growth hormone was a huge contributor to all of that. Now, we do have issues with this. We look at growth hormone that is produced in too small of quantities during childhood actually leads to something known as pituitary dwarfism. This is typically associated with some sort of tumor or growth on the pituitary gland that would keep it from functioning properly. Gigantism is actually too much growth hormone produced during childhood. We see this associated with individuals that go under very, very rapid growth patterns. Again, usually a tumor in the pituitary gland, and always a decrease in life expectancy with some of these individuals. Most often, gigantism is associated with individuals that are 8 to 9 feet tall. These are not like your 7-foot basketball players. They're just tall. Acromegaly is an interesting one that we look at when we actually get high rates of growth hormone after you have stopped growing. So the production or release of growth hormone actually during adulthood, typically caused by a tumor on the pituitary that is not identified early on. And you see that 9 and 16 years old, this woman looks fairly normal, but by the age of 33, we have expanded facial features, the broad nose, and by the age of 52, I don't know that if you passed her on the street, you would actually recognize her as a female because of all of the enlarged features of the large hands and so on that indicate this very high level of growth hormone after you've actually stopped growing. So this disease actually progresses very, very slowly, and we don't see it as much anymore because we've started to look for the signs of it early on. But before, this would have been something that was not treated and, of course, would decrease life expectancy. There are all kinds of examples of gigantism and associated growth hormone issues in individuals. This woman in the center here is actually Anna Haining Bates. This is one of my favorite larger, tall person stories. She was actually 350 pounds in this picture and about 7.5 feet tall. She was a very, very tall woman. So as you notice, her parents are not tiny, right? If she's 7.5 feet, they're in the 6-foot range easily. She was 18 pounds and 27 inches long at birth. That is a big baby. As many of you may know, the average birth weights in the U.S. sit around about 7 pounds and typically no longer than 20 or 21 inches. So she was a very, very large woman. And she was born in the early to mid 1800s. And we know that during that time, folks were not used to tall people like this. So Anna actually ended up being sent off to the circus as a tall freak show sort of individual, right? But at the circus, she met the love of her life, Martin Van Buren Bates. They were married in June 17th, 1871 in London. And as you might imagine, Martin was a very tall gentleman. We don't have records of his height, but it's estimated that this man with him was about 6 feet tall. So we can assume then that he was at least 7.5 feet in the range of Anna, or possibly even taller. They attempted to have children in the small town of Seville, Ohio, where they moved, but unfortunately their daughter was stillborn. Their daughter would have been at birth 18 pounds, 27 inches, just like her mom. They also had a son who lived to be several hours old, but didn't survive. He was 22 pounds, 28 inches long. They both died, but the idea here is there was something going on both genetically and obviously with their pituitary glands to cause this huge size associated with these individuals. Anna died in 1888 and Martin died much later in 1919. But if you're interested and ever find yourself in Seville, Ohio, you can actually go see where Anna Haining Bates is buried.